Hi everybody, and welcome to day one of our 5-day process. I am so excited that you're here. Now what I want you to do to get started is to find some kind of a substrate that is not a big deal to you. All right, I like to work in books because when it's dry I can close it up and put it away. I have no expectations of sharing it with anybody, but it's there. But find something that is, maybe you don't have a book ready. That's fine, whatever you have. How about the packing paper that Amazon uses? How about an old grocery bag? How about some paper? It needs to have a little bit of strength to it if you're using acrylic paints. And of course, if you're using watercolor, it has to be watercolor paper, but make it something that isn't important, isn't precious to you, because that's when we're more willing to take risks, is when we don't feel like things are super important and precious. Now, I talked to you before about just allowing things to happen in the welcome video. So today what we're going to do, your challenge for today, is to get your substrate ready. And I'm going to switch my camera angle in a little bit. We're going to put some gesso onto our paper. If you're using watercolor or acrylic paint, we're going to do that with either one. Because it helps to lose some control, and it's going to be kind of chunky. So if you don't have watercolor, if you don't have gesso, you can use a thicker white paint, whatever you have. Also, wax can work really well, and I'm probably going to give you an example of some of that as well. It works better for watercolor than it does for acrylic, but it works with both of them because it's a resist. And the other thing I wanted you to do before you get started is to gather all of the paints that you have. I want you to have them all together in one place. And without too much thinking, we're going to just reach in and grab the paints, the colors that feel like our environment. Okay, and this can have to do with how you feel about your environment. Don't think about it too much. Just grab the first, 3 or 4 paints that really interest you and see as you're thinking about your environment. Okay, do that, and I'm going to change my camera angle. So if you need a few moments, just pause this video, and I'll be right back with some paper, and I'll show you how to get started. Hi, everybody. I am back. I want to show you the situation with this substrate. I like to paint these sort of things in a book, and so there's just a tiny bit of preparation if you're using a book with glossy pages that you need to think about. I cover these pages with a thin coat of matte medium, and I take the page before it. This is painter's tape, and I've just put it along the edges of this side so that the paint doesn't crawl underneath quite as much as it does if you just paint over the top. I always get paint on the back side because it gets on the paper and the paper moves and that sort of thing. So this is my way of doing this, and you can see that there is paint on this tape already. That is because I reuse this tape over and over again, and as long as you just keep moving it a little bit further out so that there's some sticky part on here, it will adhere to the edge of the paper, and it will keep the paint from sticking too much, or the paint from crawling underneath is what I mean to say. So what I'm going to do now is grab some gesso. And this is just Liquitex Basics gesso. I use a number of different gessos, but this one is nice because it's super thick. And it's cheap. So you can use, this is a Catalyst wedge, and I like this. If you don't have one of those, you can also use a credit card or maybe a silicone scraper, or just look around for something that you have in your house that is going to take the control out of your hand a little bit. And we're going to take some of this gesso and just randomly kind of touch it onto places and let it be fairly thick and have some ridges and things like that, because these are the things that are going to take some control out of our hands, right? We don't know what our image is going to look like yet, and yet we're putting this stuff down on the page in a way that is going to create things that we haven't planned, and we're going to have to just deal with them when we get there. Okay, so do that, and we have to let this dry before we go any further. So if you have a hair dryer, you can do that. Otherwise, go have a cup of tea and come back, grab those 5 paints that I told you about, and lay out a background. Now, what I usually do with this is to just squirt some of these colors on and, do this. Like, let Let me show you this background a little bit. See how this background is just, swoopy all over the place. I don't think too much about where I'm going with these images. If you feel that you would like to, maybe there are patterns that represent your environment or shapes that you're intuitively just being prompted to make, by all means, go ahead and do that. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet because the time isn't here yet. Oh, one more thing that I thought of that can be a lot of fun when we do things like this. It can be really cool to make marks into these bits with something. You can use the end of a brush. You can use the tip of your credit card if you're using something like that. You can use a chopstick. There's all sorts of, anything that will really make a mark. You do that while this is still wet, and it creates an impression that the paint will sink into and create unusual effects. Hi everybody, so I'm here, my gesso is dry, and I'm getting ready to paint my background. And I just was looking at all the paint that I have and thinking about colors. This quinacridone nickel azo gold has been on my mind lately, so that has to be into it. I absolutely adore alizarin crimson. There's just something about it. I've always loved that color. And then I've got some of my craft paints here. Those are two that have been on my mind, so I'm going to use better paints for that because I don't have them in the craft paints. But I love red, so maybe with the alizarin, maybe not. I'm not sure. This mid-value gray, I've been recently painting urban landscape sort of things, so that kind of reminds me of the concrete, and that seems important to me. I love water and sky, so I've got this blue violet that kind of just popped out at me. And if you follow me at all, you know that I just love a soft yellow. This is not quite it. I add a little bit of white to it too. So those are the colors that I've got to be thinking about here. And I'm just going to start painting without too much thought and see what happens. And you know what else? Here's a kind of a yellowy green that is just caught my eye too. So let's see. I'm going to take a credit card because I don't want to have very much control. And this one is interesting because it's kind of soft, so it makes a little bit different scrapes than the ones that are really really stiff. And so I'm just going to take these colors and just squirt them out in a couple of places and see what happens. Part of the reason I like to go quick is that it gives me less time to think. So see what's happening over this gesso? Isn't that cool? This is super transparent, and that's going to be maybe a little bit of a thing. These cracks in the book are always kind of a problem, so I think about getting them filled in a little bit at times too. And let's see. This alizarin. Hopefully this is open. Okay, so I peeled the top off of it, and that little cover has some paint on it. Might as well smooch that around. This reminds me of a number of different things. When I was growing up, we spent time in New Hampshire in the summers, and there's this barn red that people paint their houses and their barns, of course. And this is, at least in part, it's close to that. Not quite that, but it's a rich, intriguing red that feels mysterious to me somehow. And mystery is a big part of what I try and express in my art. It's what fires me up and interests me and gets me excited. So, and at this point, I'm not worrying about this being, there we go, transparent or not. This kind of creamy yellow tan works really nice with the alizarin too. So I'm really not trying to control anything. I'm just spreading paint around. And sometimes, like that one I showed you when I was talking to you, the previous page, that was spread around a lot with a brush. I'm kind of really liking what's happening here with these, the harder edges that the scraper is creating. So that's interesting to me. What else do I have here? I've got this blue. I was interested in that. And the other advantage of putting this paint on really thin like this is that it dries fast. That's too hard. Let's see. Put some white with it and see if I can. There we go. That'll be better. This is there we go. This is a Blick paint, Blick matte acrylic white. The Josanja doesn't make a large tube of white, which frustrates me. So I use the Blick with that. Their paints, they're you know, kind of more like craft paints, like what I'm using here, are fine, but they have an odor to them that bothers me. So just the white is not too bad. Oh, look at what's happening there. That's cool. Just a little bit more over here. Wow, that's super chaotic. Okay, let's see. I like to paint all the way out to the edges. You certainly don't have to. Sometimes I put the tape around the edges in here too. But with a book that's already printed, I find that the backgrounds can be distracting to me. But if you like that and that works for you, that's awesome. Okay, now I also had this gray. Let's see. I feel like I want to just kind of settle this down a little bit. So let's look at what could I do. My environment is reasonably calm at this point. Oh, that's pretty. I won't go into the gesso there. Okay, so yeah, that's cool. Now then, I'm looking for that gesso a little bit. I'm going to just scrape through this paint in places and get some of that gesso texture back. Or, you know, rubbing paint over the top of it too can work really nicely. Let's see. Yeah, I think that is kind of interesting. Looking at this now, I really wish that I had stopped sooner, but I didn't, and there's a reason why it didn't occur to me. So we'll find out. Talked about calming it down and it's not calming down, so that's fine too. That's just, this is the way it wants to be. So that, I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to let that dry, and then tomorrow we'll be back to start at beginning our self-portrait. Well, we've already begun it, right? Because this is our background, our environment, what our surroundings feel like. So we've already started, and we'll see. Now this, I want you to understand, you're painting your own thing. You know, you're listening to your own intuition and choosing your own colors and making the kind of marks that you want to make today as you're painting this. I also just want to acknowledge that, like, this is, I don't know, this looks like a hot mess to me right now, but it's what it is. It's what happened. It's what will occur. I very frequently, when I do these things, oh, there's some I didn't cover, don't really know what's going to happen. So it's a giant leap of faith for me to record this stuff, for one thing, and also to just allow it, you know, to not keep working on it until I get it fixed and pretty. So I want to encourage you to stop before you start fixing and prettying. Let it be unsettling if that's how it feels. Let it be ugly if that's how it feels. Let it be not enough if that's how it feels. Those are all things that will feed into this process later on. All right, so thanks for joining in. See you tomorrow.